So this next session will give us some insights into the important work being done in the field of robotics. Robots today represent some of the most challenging areas in AI today. When you embody intelligence in a physical object, like a robot, all aspects of AI need to be deployed. This includes sensing and data reception, anticipation, perception, reasoning, and most importantly, movement and physical action. Now, I'm not talking about industrial robots, which perform pre-programmed repetitive tasks. Those kinds of robots have been used in manufacturing environments like automotive assembly for decades. The robots we're going to be talking about today are much more flexible and in some ways much more human. They are mobile, they're dexterous, and in some cases, they're actually socially assistive. So rather than being autonomous, they are expected to live amongst us and collaborate with humans, and they're expected to collaborate with us and even understand us in various ways. The implications for our lives and our work are important to consider. So we're going to begin by hearing from Maya Matarik, a professor in the School of Engineering at the University of Southern California. Her research is endowed with giving robots the ability to help people, such as the elderly and the disabled. Maya's task will illustrate how human-centered design is allowing robots to interact with people in a much more natural way. Maya, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about probably something you don't expect, but I've made a business of it. So when we think about robots today, when we thought about robots in all of history, we always think about robots as doing work. In fact, that's where the word robot comes from. Robot comes from rabota, which means repetitive, boring, dangerous, dirty labor. So our vision of robotics is robots doing these things that we don't want to do or can't do or shouldn't have to do. So robots are doing work. But if robots are doing work, then why is the clicker not working? Yeah, if the robots are doing work, the clicker would work. There we go. So if robots are doing all the work, what will people be doing? And this is not a talk about the future of work, but people are talking a lot about it. And it does have these significant implications in terms of what will happen if and when robots are more and more capable of taking those jobs away. But I don't really want us to think about that. I want us to think about a different future. I want us to think about a future in which robots are really, really helpful to us in really fundamental ways, but they're not actually doing physical work. And that's why I told you it would be different than you might be anticipating. So what if what we need from robots, what we really need in terms of to be well and prosperous and healthy and long living, is actually not for them to do physical work at all? And that brings us to this issue of the care gap that we're all very familiar. There's a giant challenge facing this country and other developed countries, and underdeveloped countries as well in a different way, and also a huge opportunity if we want to look at it. And that is the gap between the massive amounts of care that people need one-on-one versus the amount of care that they're able to get from the current standard of care, regardless of where they are on the income spectrum in terms of what is covered. So you can look at a variety of populations. These numbers can be relatively depressing. So, you know, whether we can look at the young, the old, or everyone in between, everyone is familiar with the aging population. Everyone is familiar with those demographics. But in fact, that's a very limited view of where the need is. Look at the young. Look at the fact that we have, let's pick autism. 1 in between 45 and 68 children are at the autism spectrum today in this country. And that is a lifelong challenge, so it's not going away. 5.7 million special needs. More than 20% of the population has one or more disabilities, and this is lifelong. So the need and the opportunity are huge. Now, what does that have to do with robots? Well, let's think about what people really need. Not just people with special needs, but everyone. We need technologies that will improve our motivation to do the work that we need to do. We need technologies that help us socialize with each other and not with the technologies themselves. Why do I say that? Not because I'm a zealot, after all, I'm a technologist, but all studies in human health show that having friends, even tending to a plant, will make you live longer. We have no studies that show that interacting with screens will make us live longer. We need technologies that will make us fundamentally more human. And why do we need that? Because you cannot outsource the drive and the will to live. And going all the way down to neuroscience and all the way up to human behavior, every study will show that if you need to recover, if you need to learn, if you need to train, you need to want to do it, and then you need to do it a lot to get good at it. You cannot outsource that. You have to want to be and do. So what does that have to do with robots again? Well, so about 12 years ago or so, we started this field of socially assistive robots. Robots that help, but through social, not physical means. So these robots don't do your work for you. You need to do your work, and typically work of recovery, learning, and so on. You'll have to do it yourself. But the robots are there to help you in ways that are fundamentally necessary. These ways include monitoring, but monitoring is not, to me, that's sort of the lowest level. There are many technologies that will monitor, and some are undesirable, but that's not really interesting. What's really more interesting is coaching and training, providing motivation, helping people scaffold what they need to do to encourage them to be there when we don't have the drive, when we don't have the will, when we get discouraged, when we get tired, when we get demoralized. So this combination of motivation and companionship and coaching is really fundamental. And it's fundamental whether you're trying to learn from an able perspective or a more challenged perspective. So that's the name, Robots That Care. Now, why does embodiment matter? You could ask me very legitimately, why couldn't we do all of this with just screen-based interfaces? And the reason that we can't is because we are wired and evolved to be the creatures that we are. How we perceive the world is not only through the sensors in our body, but by mapping others like us to the way we move and we behave. So there's a lot of neuroscience now. There's an entire about 15, 20-year-old field of neuroscience of embodiment, which shows conclusively that the way we interact with screens is different from the way we interact with physically co-present other agents. Those agents may be people, typically are. They may be pets, and they also may be robots. So your brain on robots is different from your brain on screens. And that's important. That's a key hook. So when you socially interact with a robot, when you also socially and maybe tactily interact with the robot, you engage the same of your brain circuitry that you do when you're interacting with humans. And that's what helps you get better, be motivated, do well, live longer. So let me give you an example from stroke rehabilitation of a robot that we developed now already several years ago. But it illustrates many points. I will talk a little bit over it, but mostly watch the video. So Connie is a stroke patient. She has a permanent disability, as more than 85% of stroke survivors do. She's trying to do activities of daily life.
Good morning, Connie.
And here's someone to help her, but not doing the things for her, because then she'll never recover, but motivating her to do the demoralizing task of doing the activities herself.
Connie, have you thought about your exercises? I bet you're feeling strong today.
She's eating fiber. We call that a robot trap over there. If the robot doesn't fall in the water pit, it's good.
Hey, Connie, are you ready? I brought my workout.
Look at that. Look how buff it is. Wouldn't you trust that, coach? But the appearance is important. And eventually, with enough encouraging, she'll get worn down. And now comes the really hard task of getting her to do what she needs to do for herself, even though it's tiring, demoralizing, sometimes painful, depressing, and slow, ever so slow to see improvement.
Seriously, you can do better than
So you need challenge. You need a coach like a human coach to drive you and make you do things you don't want to do.
that. Connie, I might be a robot, but I am not blind.
Definitely not with machine vision, not blind, especially these days with 3D vision. So someone is there to help her get well to do this repetitive, boring task, which she won't do on her own, and there really isn't anyone else to do it with her for hours a day. There's a little homage to Rocky from the film editors. there's always a Rocky that happened recently that you can tie it to. Here is a key thing. Activity of daily life, feeding yourself post-stroke, very hard. This is not a way to feed yourself, but it is a way to recover. So why does she bother to eat with her right arm? Why? Because she could make this look back at the robot and just say, you see what I did? That pride in having accomplished something that you can share with another agent, that is fundamental. And that is something that we have not yet seen in merely screen-based interfaces. It is something that is inherent to our wiring as social creatures relating to other physically embodied social creatures. Something about the motivation. So we got interested in this 12 years ago, and we and others have been working on it since then. We've put a lot of robots in the wild, and by the wild I really mean the wild. So cardiac wards and elder care facilities and Alzheimer's care, memory units, and special education classrooms where things are really hard. Because frankly, things are really easy in the lab. They may seem hard, but they're not. They're not really hard at all. So I tell my students, one day out of the lab is worth a year in the lab. So, and it's about that painful too. So we've done a lot of things. We've done some really long-term studies, but 6 months is really not that long, but that's as long as it gets in our field. We've done really large studies, 75 plus participants. It seems like a lot, but it's nowhere on the level of clinical trials. Why? Why don't we do more? Because it's very, very hard and expensive to do these studies. So hopefully this will scale up in the future. But let's see what we've learned. So first of all, many, many insights. There's great promise, but we have to proceed very carefully. We have done large studies that have shown Alzheimer's patients who generally do not improve get better on a task and say things like, oh, this robot, you know, it's coming back to visit me. I don't want to go and get my hair done. And these are people who don't leave the facility because they're stage 2 Alzheimer's. So they weave it in their narratives, and the therapists were very happy about this. We've worked with a lot of kids with autism who have demonstrated empathy, initiated play, shown latent social behaviors that they don't show with other people. So there's a great deal of promise. We've had kids with autism say things like, oh, now I know how my teacher feels when I don't do what she's telling me to do, like the robot isn't doing what I'm telling it to do, because that happens. We have done very large studies comparing people across the age spectrum using robots versus computers and having very strong effects in favor of robots versus computers in exercises and so on. But there are many, many things we find about personal differences. And I'm sorry that I can't show you videos of these because these are human subjects, so they can't go on the web. But there's some really beautiful moments where people truly engage, they get motivated, they do what they need to do. But they vary in terms of their personality. They vary in terms of how much they want to do what the robot says versus what they want to do. And cheating. People cheat. They love to cheat. Everyone cheats.